Hello and welcome to this tutorial video. My name is Dr. Melissa Sell, and I'm a chiropractor, and I help people understand the connection between their physical and emotional health using the 5 biological laws of Germanic New Medicine, which I've been working with for about the last 3 years. What you believe about health is important, your paradigm, the lens through which you see the world. It shapes your fears, and it shapes your outcomes. And today I want to share with you a radically different way of understanding health. And if you're open to understanding things in a new way, I think you're going to find it very interesting. So let's dive in. The information contained in this presentation is intended for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice. And if you're interested in diving in further, here are a few of the sources I used in the creation of this presentation. So why do you think people get sick? What is your belief? Most people, if you have been, raised, pretty much everywhere, we have been raised with the idea of the germ theory, which is the notion that bacteria and viruses get into the body and cause infections. That the viruses have a program for replicating themselves and they attack certain areas of your body. Or the bacteria, they want to take over and infect different areas of the body. And so, you've probably taken an antibiotic to kill the bacteria. You've probably received a vaccination to try to outwit the body with a minor response to viral particles so that your body mounts a defense. That's what most of us believe. That's how I was raised, believing in bacteria and viruses being the cause of illness. And then there's other illnesses like cancer and heart disease that don't seem to have a bacteria or virus. And so we assume that it's the genes, that the genes must be faulty or something's going wrong and the body is attacking itself or it's doing something foolish like replicating cells randomly. And so we think that genes can be the cause of disease. And then there's the lifestyle. If people are eating healthy, they seem to be sick less often. So we think that our lifestyle and the foods we eat and the products that we use have something to do with whether or not you are getting sick on a frequent basis. So basically, we've got the cause on the left, the bacteria, the virus, the gene, the unhealthy lifestyle, and what we believe is that those things cause a breakdown of proper function in the body. So it messes up the organ, it messes up the immune system, and the result is some type of dysfunction, dis-ease, or sickness. So we see all of these things: heart disease, a rash, the flu, diarrhea, having a cold. We see all of those as bad things due to the cause on the left. And so when you're in this paradigm, it makes perfect sense that you would go after the bacteria. You'd go after the virus, the gene, the lifestyle. You'd do whatever you can on the left to prevent what's going on the right. But did you know there is another explanation for the things that seem to go wrong in the body, for the things that we call sickness, that we think is our body breaking down, having a problem? Dr. Hammer discovered something very, very fascinating about the human body, and that's what I want to get further into today. A little bit of history. Dr. Hammer, the way that he came to his discoveries, it started with the loss of his son. His 17-year-old son was killed, and 3 months later, Dr. Hammer discovered he had developed testicular cancer, and he had not had a history of cancer in his family, and so he hypothesized this had to be connected to the trauma that he experienced, and he set about extensively studying, going further than anyone before, because people have known emotions, stress can do things to the body, and psychosomatic illness, the idea of certain stresses inducing illness in the body, has been talked about prior to Dr. Hammer, but his work is very unique. And it's very, very detailed, and it gets into the biological history of human beings, and I believe it's the most accurate and astute observation and discovery in the realm of science and medicine. So here's what he discovered. Everything that we call a disease, every so-called disease, is caused by an unexpected emotional or biological conflict shock. something happens to a person that catches them completely off guard. And this conflict shock is also termed a DHS, Dirk-Hammer syndrome, in honor of Dr. Hammer's son. And so as soon as this thing occurs, the organism, the person, is affected at the level of their psyche, their brain, and their organ. And something starts to happen. An adaptation process is initiated. And these adaptations, they're not meant to harm or kill the individual, but rather they're meant to facilitate the resolution of the conflict, to give you the greatest chance of survival. There are a few exceptions to symptoms or diseases being caused by biological conflict shock, and those would be due to injury, poisoning, medication effects, or deficiency. But the thing now that we begin to talk about disease or sickness, I no longer see the flu, a rash, even cancer as a disease. I don't see it as a problem. I see it for what it is biologically, which is a significant biological special program that is serving some type of purpose. And so what I believe, based on my own personal observation and in studying this work, is that the cause of tissue changes in the body is a biological conflict shock, something that catches the individual off guard. Then there are intentional tissue adaptations that occur in the body, which eventually result in a tissue healing process. And then that's when you get the symptoms of the rash or the flu or the headache or the diarrhea. The body is going through a healing process. And so that's what I want to illustrate for you today, is how this works. So what's a conflict shock and how can it happen? There are so many different types of potential conflict shocks that an organism, an individual can experience. Your body is constantly on alert. It's constantly scanning your environment for signs of danger. Have you ever been surprised by something that, or like maybe a police officer on the side of the road and you weren't paying attention, you were going a little too fast and all of a sudden you caught your eye and immediately you got nervous? Your body's constantly looking out for signs of danger. And when you experience something that catches you off guard, your body, we're all familiar with kind of the fight or flight response. That's that sympathetic activity that occurs when you are caught off guard. But the thing Dr. Hammer discovered is that very specific tissue adaptations begin to happen depending on the content or the type of conflict that you experience. So that's the cool thing, is that your body is extremely nuanced. Your nervous system, your subconscious mind, your perceptual faculties are very nuanced, and so it can determine and decipher all of these different types of conflicts that you can have. You could be feeling too slow, feeling behind in life, feeling abandoned, feeling isolated, left out, feeling disfigured, feeling ugly. Your body has, when you feel ugly or disfigured, or you're devaluing yourself, you're not feeling strong enough or good enough, all of these feelings, all of these emotions that we experience after we've been caught off guard by either a realization or something happening to us, you'll begin to think of your emotional states as communication to your nervous system about what adaptations are necessary to help you to survive and make it through this upsetting situation. So separation conflicts, fear, anger, a stink conflict, these are all different types of things that can happen. When we have a loss, when something shocking happens in front of us, when you're a little baby, there's so many different types of conflicts that you can have because you don't even have the concept or the words to express how you're feeling. You're just pure feeling. So keeping in mind that there's all sorts of different types of conflict shocks, and each conflict is associated with an area in the brain and a certain type of tissue in the body. So one of the ways that we try to figure out what conflict you experienced is by deciphering your symptoms. Your body has a language, and when you are having symptoms, your symptoms tell the story of the conflict that you experienced. Symptoms will also help to indicate whether you're in the conflict active phase, meaning you're still worried, you're still stressed, you're still panicked, you're still preoccupied with whatever it is that happened, or if you've shifted into the healing phase and your body is now restoring tissue. And so something like a dry cough. So if someone's coughing near you, what that indicates to me is not that you have a mysterious virus in your body that you might give to me, but rather that at some point you experienced a territorial fear conflict that has since resolved, and now your body's in the process of healing and repairing your bronchial mucosa. So I want to get into the territorial fear and this coughing situation because this has to do with what everybody is talking about, which is the COVID-19 or this coronavirus, that is causing respiratory symptoms, and everybody's freaking out, and we think it's caused by a mysterious new virus. And I want to explain how this is viewed from this new perspective. So if a person is having a fever and a dry cough, lung tickles, maybe even it's advanced into bronchitis or pneumonia, difficulty breathing, that indicates that that person experienced some type of territorial fear conflict. And so when that person has these symptoms, we can look back in their personal history to try to figure out what it is that they went through that caused them to be afraid. And here are some examples. So a territorial fear is a fear for your safety. You're feeling unsafe. There's some type of threat. At work, at home, at school, in your town or region, a fear within your space, your physical space. An attack, abuse, bullying, violence, gunshots, loud sounds can initiate a territorial fear conflict. Fears about your health. The fear of contagion can induce a territorial fear conflict. A diagnosis, a medical procedure, hospitalization, and a fear for the safety of the group. Large groups of people can experience a territorial fear conflict simultaneously. An interesting little factoid about everything that's going on is that, where the virus allegedly started was Wuhan, China. And the people of that region, if you look at what they were experiencing, there was an incinerator that was, I think, being built in their town. And they did not want it, and there were protests, and people didn't want this incinerator pumping out pollution into the air that their children are breathing. So that's like a fear for the safety of everyone's well-being. And so if a bunch of people at a given time all experience some type of fear due to a local threat, that can induce a conflict in a lot of different people at once. Ideas of pandemic, media panic, all of these different things. The thing about biological conflict shocks is that they affect individuals differently. Every individual has a unique way that they see the world and the way that they perceive threats from their environment. And so not everyone that, goes through has a certain type of conflict. Let's say there's a bank robber and you're at the bank. Not every single person in the bank at that moment is going to experience a territorial fear necessarily. Everyone's going to see that experience through their own unique lens. So one person might have a territorial fear, another person might have an existence conflict, another person might have an indigestible morsel conflict. It really just depends on their unique perception. Another thing about conflicts is it could be actual, like an actual threat in your immediate environment. And those are the types of biological conflicts that, your ancient body is used to having, are immediate, actual, present threats, dangers right here. There is a predator. There's a cougar after you. There's some type of animal or predator right coming after you. And in those moments, you go through that fight, flight, or freeze response. There's an immediate response, and then typically the whole situation is over as soon as either the animal gets you, you get away, you get the animal, or you freeze and it leaves you alone. So typically we resolve conflicts, in nature, biologically. Historically, conflicts were resolved rather quickly. But given these big, beautiful cerebral cortexes that we can have perceived conflicts where there's not an actual danger in your living room, but there's a newscast and there's someone who's pumping fear into your living room. And so you feel the presence of fear, even if there's not an actual threat. And so perceived threats are still experienced by the body as actual threats. So let's go through the first biological law for the territorial fear conflict. So again, psyche, brain, organ. This is one of the many amazing things Dr. Hammer discovered is that, so the psyche is the initiator. Your psyche is what perceives the threat. And the moment that happens simultaneously, there's going to be an impact in the brain. Remember, specific areas of the brain control specific organs. For this biological program, the control center is the temporal lobe and the sensory cortex. And the moment of the conflict, there's going to be an impact there. And erosion of the bronchial mucosal lining. That's the tissue change. That's the organ effect of a territorial fear conflict. There's widening of the bronchial mucosal lining. And I'll talk in a few minutes about why that happens. So now let's move into the second biological law. It's very important to understand this one. This one will help you make sense out of what is going on in your body. So just a brief overview. Normal day-night rhythm in a body when you're in homeostasis, which means balance, your normal rhythm when you don't have any conflicts going on. You're in a day-night rhythm where during the day you're more sympathetic active. Your nervous system is more, you're awake, fight or flight mode. Then, in the evening around 5 p.m., you shift into the parasympathetic or the rest or digest mode. And so normally we're just shifting day and night until the moment that you are caught off guard by something that scares you, by this territorial fear conflict. And in that moment, your body sets off this biological program. And now you shift into a phase of heightened sympathetic activity, also called the cold phase because your hands and feet often will go cold. This is when you have difficulty sleeping or you fall asleep and then you wake up soon after and you are compulsively thinking about whatever this problem is. Often your heart rate and your blood pressure will be up, no appetite, high energy. Your body is on board with you resolving this conflict. This is the phase of active tissue adaptation. Depending on the organ involved, there's either going to be tissue proliferation, which means extra cells, or tissue erosion, which means less cells. And that will persist until you resolve the conflict, until you get out of the danger, something changes, you resolve it, sigh of relief, and then you shift into the healing phase, the regenerative phase. This is where you are warm, feverish, swollen, inflamed. All healing happens in a fluid environment, so there's going to be fluid and swelling and pain and discomfort, headaches often because there's also swelling in the brain region. And so you're going to swell and be uncomfortable. This is when you feel sick. And so again, this is when we're thinking, oh, there's something wrong with me now. But really, this is when your body is in this active tissue repair mode. And so the first phase of healing persists until something called the healing crisis or the epileptoid crisis. And this is a surge of sympathetic activity meant to squeeze out the edema from the brain and from the tissue region. And then your body shifts into the second phase of healing where there's continued scarification. And then eventually you go back to normal. So that is a single law of two phases looking at the second biological law. So now let's go through each of those steps for this territorial fear conflict so you can begin to understand what the heck is happening when a person develops some type of bronchial issue, some type of cough. So during the active conflict, there's this territorial fear. There's tissue loss. Remember I said some organs have tissue loss, other organs have tissue proliferation. For this biological program, there's tissue loss or erosion or ulceration. So this is the lining, the mucosal lining of the bronchioles is being eroded. Now the amount of tissue loss is going to depend on the intensity and the duration of the conflict. Now during this phase, you are typically asymptomatic. You normally don't have any symptoms. All you know is that you're kind of panicked, you're afraid, your body is, helping you to get out of this conflict by keeping you awake. Remember, you're not sleeping as well. Cold hands and feet, you are actively in this state of fear. And so every moment that you're in this state of fear, there's going to be erosion, tissue loss within the bronchial lining. Why is this happening? So every biological program, it has a purpose. There is a reason. Your body is very, very, very intelligent. It knows how to do things, and it knows how to adapt certain cellular structures in your body so that you can get to safety so that you can survive. So the whole point of this is to open up that airway, widen the lumens. You can take in more air. The more air that you can take in, the better that you can, take in this oxygen, the better chance you have of getting out of this scary situation that you're experiencing with this territorial fear. So that's the point of it. The bronchial mucosa erodes and widens to open up the airway to bring in more oxygen. Then you get to the point of the conflict resolution. Hopefully this happens soon after the conflict itself. This is the ideal, is that, you can't totally prevent conflicts from happening, but you can notice when you are in conflict and seek a swift and speedy resolution, because the sooner you resolve the conflict, the more minor the symptoms are going to be. The longer the conflict lasts means more tissue adaptation, which means more eventual tissue repair will have to take place. So conflict resolution can take many possible forms. The most natural resolution is that, so you were afraid of something in your territory, you regain a safe environment. You shift, you get safe, you get away from whatever the danger was, and then you can breathe that sigh of relief. Sometimes a natural resolution is not possible, so you have to shift your perception. Sometimes emotional release or forgiveness is necessary, a new perspective, shifting your understanding, seeing the bigger picture, gaining new information. So right now, if you're kind of afraid, kind of got this fear of viruses and bacteria and germs lurking out around you, and you've got this fear of that, by developing a new understanding and gaining new information, that could be potentially a resolution of a conflict you're experiencing. So this is something that I do help coach people on, is shifting out of conflict and into a resolution. And then you move into the healing phase. So when there's tissue adaptation, there's tissues changing. So your body has to set to work to set you back to normal. So during that conflict, there was a loss of tissue. Now you need to restore the tissue. And so that is what's happening during the healing phase. So as there's cellular proliferation, as your body is restoring this lining, you're going to have coughing, tickles in the lungs. It could be a dry cough. You could have a little phlegm, some sputum, some stuff that you're coughing up. And this is just the repair work that's happening in that airway. There could be inflammation. It could, develop into a bronchitis where there's more inflammation in that bronchial lining. I'll talk a little bit about pneumonia in a moment, because that has to do with additional water retention, which causes an intensification of symptoms. Now, this is the point at which you might be diagnosed with a virus. And based on what we understand about, the changes within the body during even the conflict active phase, you could be, while active with the conflict, you may get even diagnosed then. Because this is typically, though, is when you have the symptoms. That's when somebody wants to swab you and say, oh, do you have the germ? Do you have the virus? And I'll talk a little bit about what's actually happening from the GNM perspective. Also fatigue. Fatigue is very common during every healing phase, because your body is like, okay, you were in danger for a while. Now rest. Now rest while we repair the tissue. Another thing you might experience during this phase is a dull headache and dizziness, because all healing, when there's healing on the organ level, there's also healing on that brain region. Remember, we talked about how the brain is involved with every single conflict. There's going to be swelling. And so it's during the healing phase that you may experience a headache. Once your body has reached the maximum point of swelling, you're going to turn a corner, and this corner is called the epileptoid crisis. This is the surge of sympathetic dominance. This is the big squeeze. And so you may have a big flare-up of some type of symptoms, like an intense coughing fit, difficulty breathing. You might have some chills or dizzy spells. And this is when the body is squeezing the edema out of the brain region and out of the organ region. Have you ever had one of those terrible coughing fits in the middle of the night? These will often happen in the middle of the night, because it's when you're in your deepest state of relaxation. That's when the body does this surge of sympathetic dominance. Now, for certain conflicts, this can be, result in a seizure or a heart attack or a stroke. This is like a big event, depending on the intensity and the duration of the original conflict. So again, be expecting, some type of intense coughing or intense symptoms symptom flare up, but this is part of that normal process. A lot of times people will think, oh no, just when I thought I was getting better, all of a sudden I'm worse. But this is a normal part of the healing process, that there's this one big surge of sympathetic dominance that causes a flare up of intense symptoms. And then you shift into the scarification phase, where there's the completion of the tissue restoration and your body is just getting back to normal. So that is the second biological law for territorial fear conflict affecting the bronchial mucosa. And so the coughing, the inflammation in the lungs, the fever, it's all a part of the healing phase for a territorial fear conflict. So it's not that there was something going wrong in the body or a virus was taking over the body. The body was repairing the adaptation that occurred due to the biological conflict. But I thought it was a virus, and when you have this model in your mind, it is going to take a while to make the shift into seeing this through this new lens. So the conventional theory is that a virus opportunistically gets in through your mucosal membranes, your nose, your eyes, your mouth. And if your immune system is low, or if your microbiome is disrupted, because, obviously not everybody gets sick. Why do some people get sick and others don't? Well, we come up with some reason that, some people have a better immune system than other people. And so the unlucky ones, the ones that didn't have, the ability to fight it, develop, I quote, infection. And we think that this little guy, this little non-living particle, gets in the body and that it has a nefarious agenda, that it wants to go and take over your lungs. I actually watched a YouTube video about, kind of describing it from this, the germ theory model of it goes in and it just replicates itself and it attacks the lungs. Now, from the German medicine understanding is that viruses, or what we call viruses, they're present during the healing phase and they play a functional role in restoring tissue. And, the fourth biological law is the law of the ontogenetic system of microbes. And so Dr. Hammer discovered that rather than being at odds, rather than being at war with microorganisms, our bodies evolved alongside microorganisms and they serve us and they have a vital role. And he always said that if there is a virus, if there is a thing called a virus, it plays a role at the healing site. Well, but what about contagion? And again, when you're seeing something through the lens of my friend is sick, my coworker's sick, and then I got sick. So they had to have passed something, from them to me. How else would I have gotten sick? Or, you've been in a family and everybody in the family gets sick. And I love this Tesla quote, because I think the thing is we do not know enough about the transmission of energies. He says, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So here are a few alternative causes of, quote, contagion. Remember that group fear we talked about earlier. When you are in a group and everybody's afraid of something, don't you pick up on that? Don't you energetically feel this sense of fear? I mean, even just being out in public right now and everyone being in masks, it's kind of like it's scary. It's dystopian. It's weird. And so we take for granted how, emotionally and mentally we are affected by the states of other people. There's also, the herd mentality. If you have the fears that the herd has, you're going to develop the biological conflicts of the herd. You can be very sensitive to other people's fears. We have a lot of people who they consider themselves very empathetic. And so they have this empathy. So they pick up on and they mirror. We actually have something called mirror neurons where we mirror states in other people. Something really cool is the work of Rupert Sheldrake, and he talks about morphic resonance. And his work includes stuff like how your dog knows when you're coming home, how, flocks of birds fly in a perfect formation, and how we kind of have this morphic field, this morphic resonance. And, this is a potential model for understanding contagion, how you can be resonating with someone who is experiencing a conflict and, their fear, their worry, you can pick up on it, you can experience it for yourself. And then there's also, your belief, placebo or nocebo. There's so much power in our thoughts, and there's so much power in the ability to get someone to think something. So I'm not saying I know for certain how things spread through populations of people or how large groups all, will develop some type of sickness symptom. But I believe that it has everything to do with the biological conflicts they experience and how exactly we pick up those conflicts from other people. I believe that there's still more to learn in that realm. I do believe, though, that the individual, a person who really thinks for themselves, who is affected by the emotional states of those around them, or at least has this level of distance and separation, so they're not, absorbing all the fears and the worries of their peers. I believe that an individual has the ability to have a mental immunity to the thoughts, the fears, the worries of other people. And people who, quote, never get sick, I think they have that individuation where they don't pick up on what everybody else might pick up on. So let's talk about the exosome theory, which I'm super, super excited about. This is Dr. Andrew Kaufman. He put together this awesome presentation in response to all the COVID-19 stuff, and he made a connection that totally supports everything from the Germanic New Medicine model and the 5 biological laws. So here's a quote from him that I think is really good. There are really not pandemic levels of people getting sick and dying from whatever is going on. That, I believe, is absolutely true. I saw some numbers earlier today that actually show that in 2020, we have lower deaths than on average for the previous 5 years. So the numbers are far less than the typical flu season. However, there are clearly some people who are getting sick. And he says he believes that what is causing the illness is that there is some kind of insult that occurs that causes the damage, and then there is a reaction to it, which is the production of exosomes. And when we are testing for the supposed virus, we're actually testing for these exosomes, which confirms there's some type of unhealthy process going on in the body. I would argue that it's not unhealthy, but probably quite functional, because the significant biological special programs that we experience, although yes, there's tissue adaptation and there's a time where you're feeling, quote, sick, none of it is unhealthy because it's a normal bodily response. So the exosome theory. What Dr. Kaufman is presenting is that what we're calling viruses are extremely similar to an actual structure within cells called exosomes. I remember learning about this in cell biology back in chiropractic school. And so exosomes, they contain RNA, just like a virus. They're the same size. They often use the same types of receptors. They're found in the same regions of the body. And there's no relevant distinction in appearance or function. And exosomes, they are induced or they're produced in the cell in response to toxic substances, stress or fear, injury, or, quote, disease. And what they've been found to do is that they're cellular messengers. They do signaling. And so your body tissues, they have to communicate some way, and they seem to communicate through these things called exosomes. And so they are there for tissue regeneration, cleanup, and wound healing are some of the things that exosomes have been found to do. Another medical doctor has said that the virus is fully an exosome in every sense of the word. So this is amazing, amazing information. So what scientists, since we've got Pasteur, who developed the germ theory, who was an absolute fraud, by the way, definitely look further into Louis Pasteur being a fraud. But, we've developed this idea of outside agent causes sickness. And so, once they discovered that certain diseases don't have a bacteria, they started looking for something else. And they found these particles. And, when the electron microscope was discovered, they're like, here it is. It's this virus. And they're looking at this small particle. They're looking at just a snapshot. Keep that in mind. When you look at just a snapshot of something, you don't necessarily know what it's doing. But because the scientists, and I highly recommend the book Virus Mania, because it explains how we've shoved the idea of viruses into this bacterial model, and the bacterial model wasn't even accurate, and so the viral model definitely is not accurate, that we take this snapshot and we say, this is the causative agent. We see a sick person, we say, let me take some fluid out of your lungs, let me try to, figure out what kind of cells are in there, and then you find something, you say, this must be it. Based on this work, we're seeing that what we're calling a virus may very well actually be a functional part of the body, a cellular function in response to cellular changes. And so this makes perfect sense when you look at the GNM model, that there's a biological conflict shock, there is tissue adaptation, tissue loss. Remember, like we were talking about in the case of the bronchial mucosa, there's a loss of tissue. So that is stress or fear in the body. And then once the conflict is resolved, the body begins repairing and restoring that tissue. And so wouldn't it make sense that when the tissue is being repaired and restored, that there would be some type of small information packets letting the tissue know what needs to be done? And so these exosomes, like I said, they function as in tissue regeneration and wound healing. So is it a virus that's causing a sickness, or is it a biological conflict that induced tissue adaptation, and then there's tissue repair and exosomes, a normal function of the human body, normal cellular communication that occurs in response to tissue damage, and that is what we're swabbing and determining, this is the disease-causing agent. And I want you to decide for yourself. I want you to further explore this idea. Don't just take my word for it. This is what makes sense to me. I teach the stuff that makes the most sense to me. And I trust the human body. I believe that the human body is brilliant and that it has plans and programs, and it's got ways of surviving and adapting to shocking situations. And I believe that the exosome, formerly called the virus, is part of that process. Let me briefly touch on pneumonia, because, we're talking about people having this respiratory condition, and obviously a respiratory condition, we can panic about it and say, oh my goodness, this is very, very dangerous, because people need to breathe. And when it becomes difficult to breathe, it can be very, very scary. And one of the reasons that something like a cough could graduate into a more intense condition like pneumonia occurs due to water retention. When you are panicked, when you are freaking out, when you are feeling abandoned, isolated, like a refugee, or just scared for your life, your body begins to retain water. It goes through a program called the kidney collecting tubule program, and the body begins to retain water. Now, when you are in a healing phase from any other biological conflict, remember I said that all healing happens in a fluid environment, so there's going to be fluid in that area. If you're retaining fluid, there's going to be even more fluid in that healing area. And so what that equates to in this scenario is if you're in the healing phase from a territorial fear conflict and your bronchial mucosa is already, in this swelling, healing process, then you add even more water to it. It's like you pump up the water balloon, and so it makes it even more difficult to breathe. So there's additional swelling, which means all your symptoms are going to intensify. Coughing, labored breathing, fevers, chills, the whole deal. This is the pneumonia that can occur. And so this is why it happens. And so this is why it's so important for people to stay calm and not induce any type of panic, fear, isolation that can cause them to retain additional water. So it's very important, when I'm working with anybody, we want to first address the water retention conflict, because that's going to be intensifying any other symptoms that they may be experiencing. So let's move on. I just want to end this presentation by giving you just a brief snippet of the third, fourth, and fifth biological laws. This is a third biological law, the ontogenetic system of cancer and cancer equivalents. This is the compass of GNM. This is looking at the different types of brain-controlled sensors and then what the tissue does during conflict or during healing. So brainstem and cerebellum, these are the old brain regions. They respond with cellular proliferation, extra cells during the conflict active phase, and then during the healing phase, those cells are removed with fungi and bacteria. And then the cerebral cortex, which we talked about today with the bronchial mucosal lining and the cerebral white matter, those tissues have cellular loss, ulceration, or necrosis during the conflict active phase, followed by tissue restoration with bacteria and or exosomes during the healing phase. The fourth biological law, this is the ontogenetic system of microbes. Like I mentioned before, the microbes are your friends. They are the optimizers of the healing phase. They're seasonal workers. There's bacteria in your body all the time, but they're not always active. Even in medical science, there are things like latent TB, where we know there's TB in your body, but it doesn't seem to be doing what active TB does. And this is because these bacteria are just there on standby. They're waiting in case they're needed. And so the bacteria won't become active unless they have an instruction from the brain to become active. And with the viruses, they aid in the healing phase. So viruses, I really do think that in the near future, we're going to completely remove the idea of viruses from our vernacular because it's exosomes, I believe. I believe it's the functional part of the cell that is actually just sending messages. It's cellular communication that occurs during the healing phase of a biological tissue adaptation. So this is so freeing to know that there aren't little things out there with nefarious motives that just want to kill you. They are part of your normal healing of your body. And the fifth biological law, let's put a bow on it. This is the quintessence. This is knowing that disease is not an error. Your body is not screwing up. It's not making a mistake. These significant biological special programs, they are for the benefit of the organism. They have been perfected and evolved over millions of years of evolution. Your body has developed these mechanisms of adaptation to help you survive. You are a legacy. Your mere existence is a legacy of biological success. So many people that came before you that lived and experienced trauma and adaptation and their body healed, and every person, gained new knowledge. Every ancestor gained new knowledge about how to adapt and survive in the world. And so this is just this beautiful, holistic understanding, this Germanic new medicine, this sacred medicine of understanding that your psyche, your brain, your organ, your whole beingness, it is on your side and you can trust your body. So I hope that you found this interesting, and I hope that you pursue further knowledge. Notice how you're feeling right now. Are you feeling like I'm a quack, that I'm crazy, that this is all just gobbledygook? Or are you like, maybe there's something to this? The thing about this, the 5 biological laws, is you can watch your own body. You can watch your own experience. I've learned more from watching my own experience than anything else. That's the thing that proved to me that this work is accurate, is getting to know myself and getting to know my conflicts. And when I have a conflict and then I resolve it and then I experience symptoms every time I have anything, every time I have a zit, every time I have any type of ache or pain, or, a couple of years ago I had a UTI and I was like, oh, wow, this is fascinating to understand the biological reason that it happened. I no longer think it was just a random bacteria that crawled up the urethra and caused a problem. There is something else going on in your body. When you experience symptoms, there's a story there. And I encourage you to lean into this, to explore it further, to watch your own experience, to study more for yourself and see, again, what makes the most sense to you. Is the paradigm of, living in this world with all sorts of dangerous microorganisms and small things that can come and get you, or realizing that it's your strength, it's your own perception, it's your own communication to your body that matters most of all. So if you need anything, please reach out. You can reach me at my website, drmelissasell.com. I would love to help you in any way that I can.